The coalition laughed when the humans arrived, until one soldier carried 3 armored warriors through heavy gravity and shattered every record in military history. I have been teaching at the Interstellar Combat Academy for 12 cycles now, right? 12 cycles of dealing with cadets from 47 different species, and in all that time, in all those years of broken equipment, failed examinations and disciplinary hearings, I had never, not once, felt true fear in these hallways. Until her. But I am getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let me back up. Let me tell you how a simple collision in a corridor turned me, Velkara of the Sistine Collective, decorated military instructor and 3-time recipient of the Teaching Excellence Award, into a stuttering mess who apologized to a student half my size. It was third period break. The hallways absolutely packed with bodies, scales, feathers, and various other biological coverings. I had long stopped trying to categorize. The air filtration systems were working overtime, mixing together the sense of a dozen different atmospheres into something that smelled vaguely like burnt copper and overripe fruit. Pleasant, true. My datapad was clutched in my primary manipulator appendage, the screen displaying a truly horrifying array of test scores from my advanced tactical theory class. Failing, barely passing, failing spectacularly. I was scrolling through the disaster with increasing agitation, my neck frill rising and falling in irritation. How could an entire class manage to botch a simple question about supply line vulnerability? It was basic material, fundamental concepts that even a first-cycle cadet should understand. But no, apparently asking them to identify 3 critical weaknesses in a standard convoy formation was equivalent to requesting they solve the mysteries of faster-than-light travel. Idiots, I muttered, my translator picking up the word and broadcasting it in flat, emotionless standard. Complete and utter idiots. I was so absorbed in my righteous anger, so completely focused on mentally composing the scathing lecture I would deliver next session, that I failed to notice the traffic pattern shifting around me. Failed to notice the small figure moving perpendicular to the main flow of students. The collision was not gentle. I am a Sistine, which means I stand roughly 8 feet tall when fully extended, with a body mass that can best be described as substantial. The individual I collided with was, in comparison, tiny. The impact sent them stumbling backward, arms windmilling for balance, while I merely rocked slightly on my rear support limbs. My first reaction, I am ashamed to admit, was annoyance. Pure, undiluted irritation at this interruption to my already foul mood. Watch where you are going, I snapped, not even looking up from my datapad. These hallways are congested enough without clumsy cadets adding to the chaos. Silence, not just from the individual I had struck, but from the surrounding students as well. The normal hallway chatter, that constant buzz of conversation and movement, it just stopped, ceased entirely. Like someone had activated a sound-dampening field. That got my attention. I looked up from my datapad, ready to deliver another cutting remark about situational awareness and personal responsibility. And that is when I saw her. Human. Female. Approximately 5 feet, 4 inches tall by their measurement system. Dark hair pulled back in what I would later learn was called a ponytail. Standard academy uniform worn correctly, everything regulation. Nothing unusual about her appearance at all, really. Except for her face. Except for her eyes. Have you ever seen a human angry? I mean truly angry. Not the performative shouting and gesturing they sometimes do for effect, but that cold, controlled fury that sits behind their eyes like a caged predator. No? Well, lucky you, because I saw it then in that hallway, and something very old and very primal in my brain, something left over from when my species was still dodging apex predators on our homeworld, started screaming at me to run. Her expression had not changed. That was the terrifying part. She was not yelling, not gesturing, not doing anything overtly threatening. She simply stood there, absolutely still, and looked at me. Just her jaw was set, her shoulders square, and her eyes, those horrifyingly forward-facing predator eyes, locked onto mine with the kind of focus usually reserved for targeting systems. I have been in combat, real combat, not simulations. I have stared down enemy fighters, negotiated with hostile species, and once spent 3 days trapped in a damaged shuttle with a malfunctioning life support system. None of that, nothing in my entire military career prepared me for the primal terror of having a human look at me like that. My neck frill flattened completely against my spine, an involuntary fear response I had not experienced since childhood. My datapad slipped from my suddenly nerveless grip, clattering against the floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent hallway. My translator struggled with the word, my vocal cords seizing up. I am sorry. It came out as a question, an actual question, my voice rising at the end like a cadet, asking permission to speak. Me. Instructor Velkara, apologizing. To a student. In front of dozens of witnesses. The human. This tiny, terrifying human continued staring for another 3 heartbeats. Each one felt like an eternity. Then, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, her right eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. That single gesture, that microscopic movement of facial muscles, somehow conveyed more judgment, more withering assessment, than a full disciplinary board review. Then she blinked, turned on her heel with military precision, and walked away. Just walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the hallway surrounded by staring students from a dozen different species, with my dignity in tatters on the floor next to my dropped datapad. Someone, I think it was a Vulnari student, made a chittering sound that their species uses for nervous laughter. It spread quickly, that laughter, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Within seconds the hallway had returned to its normal chaos, students moving again, conversations resuming. But they were all looking at me differently now. I could see it in their various visual organs, that shift in perception. The strict instructor, the demanding taskmaster, had just apologized to a student after bumping into them. Had apologized with fear in his voice. I bent down, retrieved my datapad with as much dignity as I could manage, and continued toward my office. My hands, all 3 of them, were shaking. Actually shaking. From a look. From a single silent exchange with a human who probably massed less than a third of my body weight. As I walked, my mind kept replaying that moment, that expression, trying to understand what exactly had triggered such a visceral response. Her face had shown anger, yes, but there was something else beneath it. Something controlled, something that suggested she had chosen not to act, had made a conscious decision to simply stare rather than do something far worse. And that choice, that restraint, was somehow more frightening than any overt threat could have been. I reached my office, sealed the door behind me, and sat down at my desk. The datapad with its failing scores sat forgotten in my lap. All I could think about was that human, that look, and the uncomfortable realization that I had just learned something very important about the newest species to join the galactic community. They were not just dangerous because of their death-world biology or their frankly terrifying physical capabilities. They were dangerous because they knew exactly how dangerous they were, and they chose, every single moment of every single day, not to be. And I had just bumped into one of them and then yelled at her for my own clumsiness. Yeah, I was in so much trouble. So there I was, sitting in my office, trying very hard to pretend that my entire career had not just imploded in a hallway because of one human's facial expression. The datapad sat on my desk. Screen dark now, completely ignored. Who cared about failing test scores when my reputation had just been thoroughly destroyed in under 30 seconds? My communicator chimed, then chimed again. And again. I made the mistake of checking it. 17 messages. In the span of time it took me to walk from the hallway to my office, I had received 17 messages from colleagues, students, and one very concerned administrator asking if I was feeling well, if I needed medical attention, if perhaps the stress of teaching was becoming too much for me. Delete. Delete. The last message was from Torvin, another instructor who taught zero-gravity combat on the 3rd level. We had been friends for 6 cycles, shared countless meals in the faculty lounge, and generally maintained a cordial professional relationship. His message read, "Did you really apologize to Petra Chen? You? The Velkara who once made a Krexian captain cry during evaluations? What did she do to you? Blink aggressively?" I resisted the urge to throw my communicator across the room. Barely. Yes, Torvin. She blinked. And it was terrifying. But I could not explain that. Could not explain how her eyes, those forward-facing predator eyes that marked humans as pursuit hunters from a death world that actively tried to kill its inhabitants, had triggered something in my genetic memory that I did not even know existed. Let me explain something about the Sistine people. We are not by nature a cowardly species. We have produced warriors, strategists, and explorers who have achieved remarkable things across the galaxy. But our evolutionary history is not one of apex predators dominating our environment. No, we were the ones being hunted. For millions of years our ancestors survived by being cautious, by recognizing threats, by knowing when to freeze, when to flee, and when to submit. Those instincts do not just disappear because we develop technology and join the galactic community. They sit there buried deep in our brainstems waiting for the right trigger to activate them. Petra Chen was apparently that trigger. I pulled up the Academy roster on my terminal searching for her file. Needed to know more about this human who had just verbally and psychologically dismantled me without saying a single word. There. Petra Chen. Age 22 standard years, which meant she was still practically adolescent by galactic standards. Origin, Earth. Specifically a region called California. Enrolled in the Academy 8 months ago. Academic performance. Exemplary. Physical fitness scores. Off the charts. Naturally, because humans apparently thought that recreational activities should involve near-death experiences. Combat training evaluations were interesting. Her primary instructor had noted, quote, Cadet Chen demonstrates exceptional restraint and control. Recommend advanced placement in defensive tactics. Unquote. Restraint. Control. Yes, I had certainly witnessed that had I not. There was a note flagged in her file from the integration counselor. I opened it. Curiosity overriding my usual respect for student privacy. Cadet Chen has experienced some adjustment difficulties with non-human species who mistake her direct communication style for aggression. Have recommended she moderate her facial expressions during interactions to avoid triggering fear responses in species with prey ancestry. She has declined, stating that managing others' perceptions is not her responsibility. I read that last line 3 times. She knew. This human knew that her expressions, her direct gaze, her entire predatory demeanor frightened other species, and she had actively chosen not to modify it. Not because she wanted to intimidate anyone, but because she refused to make herself smaller, less threatening to accommodate everyone else's evolutionary baggage. A small hysterical laugh escaped my vocal cords. Of course that would be the human approach. Why blend in when you can just be yourself and let everyone else deal with their own issues? My communicator chimed again. This time it was a message to all faculty from Administrator Quellen. It has come to my attention that there was an incident in the 3rd-level hallway during today's break period. I want to remind all faculty that professional conduct is expected at all times, regardless of circumstances. Collisions happen in crowded spaces. No formal complaints have been filed, and I expect this matter to be considered closed. Translation: everyone saw what happened. It was embarrassing for me. But since the human had not actually filed a complaint about being bumped into and then yelled at by an instructor, the administration was willing to pretend it never occurred. How generous. The rest of my afternoon was supposed to involve reviewing lesson plans for next week's classes. Instead, I found myself reading every available file on human psychology, human communication patterns, and human social behaviors. Did you know that humans use direct eye contact to establish dominance, show confidence, and assess threats? That a prolonged stare in human culture can be anything from a romantic gesture to a prelude to violence, depending entirely on context. Neither did I. And now I could not stop thinking about it. By the time evening cycle arrived, I had learned far too much about human facial expressions, microexpressions, body language, and the frankly exhausting number of ways they communicated without ever saying a word. Apparently that single look Petra Chen had given me could have meant anything from mild annoyance to genuine rage, and I would have no way of knowing which without understanding the subtle context clues. The galaxy was a complicated place full of species with different communication styles, different social norms, different ways of expressing everything from greeting to threat displays. I had been teaching for 12 cycles. I should have been better at this. But humans were different. Humans had evolved in an environment so hostile that their entire species had developed a psychological approach best described as controlled aggression, mixed with strategic cooperation and a healthy dose of dark humor about their own mortality. They were persistence hunters who literally chased their prey until it died of exhaustion. They were social pack animals who formed complex hierarchies and alliances. They were tool users who looked at every problem as something that could be solved through sufficient application of force or creativity. And I had yelled at one of them for being in my way. My door chimed. Someone requesting entry. Come in, I said, trying to sound normal, professional, like an instructor who had not just spent 4 hours researching human behavioral patterns because of a hallway incident. The door slid open. Petra Chen stood there. I may have made a small, undignified squeaking sound. My translator mercifully did not broadcast it. Instructor Valkara, she said, her voice perfectly neutral, perfectly calm. Do you have a moment? I would like to discuss what happened earlier. And that, right there, was when I realized that my day was about to get significantly worse. The conversation with Petra Chen the previous evening had been mercifully brief. She had apologized for her reaction, explained she had received some difficult personal news just before our collision, and assured me that she held no grudge about my initial response. Professional, courteous, completely reasonable, which somehow made it worse. Because now, standing in front of my advanced tactical theory class the next morning, I could not stop thinking about how easily she had handled the situation, how calm she had been, how controlled. Meanwhile, I had spent the entire interaction trying not to let my neck frill betray my nervousness. The classroom was arranged in a standard amphitheater configuration, seats rising in curved rows so all students had clear sight lines to the main display screen. 32 cadets from 17 different species all staring at me with varying degrees of attention, and there, fourth row slightly left of center, sat Petra Chen. She was taking notes on her datapad. Just sitting there, looking completely normal, completely engaged with the material. Not threatening anyone, not doing anything remotely intimidating. I was still terrified of her. Today I began, activating the display screen behind me. We will be discussing environmental adaptation in hostile territory, specifically how to identify and utilize local resources when standard equipment is unavailable or compromised. Standard lecture material. I had taught this topic dozens of times. Should have been able to deliver it while unconscious, but I kept glancing toward that fourth row, kept checking to see if Petra was still just sitting there taking notes. And every time I looked, I lost my train of thought. A Vulnari student in the second row, Krixik, raised one of his forearms. Instructor, you mentioned identifying local resources. Does this include biological materials from potentially dangerous fauna? Good question. Exactly the kind of engagement I normally appreciated. Yes, I said, pulling up a chart showing standard threat assessment protocols. When evaluating local fauna, you must balance the risk of acquisition against the potential benefit of the resource. For example, a creature's venom sacs might provide valuable chemical compounds, but attempting to harvest them could result in injury or death if proper precautions are not taken. I was getting back into my rhythm now, falling into the familiar pattern of lecture and response. The display screen showed various examples from different planetary environments, each one highlighting specific decision trees for resource evaluation. The key principle, I continued, is understanding your own species' limitations. A Vulnari can survive temperature extremes that would kill a cystine. A Krexian can process toxins that would incapacitate most other species. Knowing these limitations is essential for making informed decisions in the field. My eyes drifted back to the fourth row. Petra was still taking notes, her expression focused and professional. Why did that make me more nervous? Now, I said, switching the display to show a simulation of a hostile environment. Let us consider a scenario. You have crashed on an uncharted planet. Your equipment is damaged. The atmosphere is breathable, but the local ecosystem is actively hostile. What is your first priority? Several hands went up. I called on a teletonary student named Reshvik. Establish a defensive perimeter, instructor. Find shelter that can be secured against local predators. Correct. And once you have established the perimeter, what comes next? More hands. I should have called on any of them. Should have continued with the normal flow of the lecture. But some self-destructive impulse made me say, Cadet Chen, your assessment. The room went very quiet. Several students turned to look at Petra, then back at me, clearly remembering yesterday's hallway incident. Petra looked up from her datapad, completely unbothered by the attention. Water source identification. Instructor. Shelter is important, but dehydration will kill you faster than most predators. You need to locate clean water within the first 24 hours, establish a reliable access route, and implement purification protocols if necessary. Textbook answer. Exactly what I would have said. Correct, I managed. And how would you identify clean water sources in an unfamiliar environment? She did not hesitate. Observe local herbivore behavior. Track their movement patterns to find watering holes. Test the water for basic contaminants using portable analysis tools if available. If not, look for moving water rather than stagnant pools. Check for healthy vegetation around the source. And start with small quantities to test for adverse reactions before full consumption. A Krexian student, Volmuth, made a clicking sound of approval. That is quite thorough, Chen. Did you study survival training before the academy? Petra smiled. It was not a threatening smile. Not at all. Just a normal, friendly expression. So why did it make my neck frill twitch? Not formally, she said. But we played a lot of outdoor games as children. Camping, hiking, orienteering, that sort of thing. Games she called survival training games. Interesting, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And these games, they taught you resource identification? Among other things. Petra leaned back in her seat, clearly warming to the topic. One of my favorites was called Capture the Flag. 2 teams, large outdoor area, usually a forest or park. Each team has a flag at their base. The objective is to infiltrate enemy territory, steal their flag, and return it to your base without getting tagged by opposing team members. Crix's translator produced a confused chirp. This was a children's game? Sure. We would play for hours. You had to learn terrain navigation, strategy, team coordination, stealth movement, how to set up ambushes and defensive positions, how to create distractions while your fastest runners made the actual flag grab, reading your opponent's tactics and adapting on the fly. I stared at her. The entire class stared at her. That sounds like military tactical training, Reshvik said slowly. Petra shrugged. I guess. We just thought it was fun. There was also Manhunt, which was basically the same thing but at night with flashlights. And we played a lot of dodgeball, which teaches evasion tactics and projectile trajectory prediction. Your species trains children in combat tactics disguised as recreational activities, I heard myself say. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds intense. Petra grinned. But yeah, pretty much. Oh, and there was this one game called Red Rover where you literally form a human chain and try to stop someone from breaking through by running at you full speed. That one got banned at most schools after too many broken bones. The silence in the classroom was profound. Broken bones, Crixik repeated. In a children's game. It was poorly designed, Petra admitted. Most of our games did not result in serious injuries, just minor ones. Scraped knees, sprained ankles, occasional concussions from tree climbing. Normal stuff. Normal. She called concussions normal. Volmuth raised a tentacle. Chen, did your species evolve these games specifically to prepare young humans for combat situations? No, we just got bored easily and liked running around outside. Petra tilted her head, considering. Although I guess it makes sense that we would invent games that mimic hunting and fighting behaviors. Most predator species do that, you know, like how Earth cats practice their pouncing by chasing toys. Same concept, just with more complex rules and occasionally shin guards. She had just compared human childhood development to predator training instincts. Casually, while discussing games, I realized my hands were gripping the edge of my lecture podium hard enough to leave marks. Right, I said, my voice coming out slightly strangled. Thank you for that perspective, Cadet Chen. Very informative. Let us move on to discussing water purification techniques in more detail. I turned back to the display screen, desperately trying to regain control of my lecture. Behind me, I could hear students whispering to each other, their translators creating a low buzz of multilingual conversation. The Volnari word for humans, I had recently learned, translated roughly to the friendly predators. After this morning's class, I was beginning to think that phrase did not capture nearly enough of the existential horror of their species. They trained their children for combat through games. They considered broken bones a minor inconvenience. They thought chasing each other through dark forests with artificial lights was fun, and Petra Chen, who had reduced me to apologizing in a hallway with a single look, thought all of this was completely normal. I still had 40 minutes left in this lecture. It was going to be a very long class. If I had known how the rest of the week would unfold, I would have called in sick, claimed a sudden onset of scale rot, faked a communicable disease, anything to avoid what happened 3 days after that disastrous lecture about human childhood games. The message came through during my morning meal. Instructor Jovesh, who taught practical hand-to-hand combat applications, had suffered an unfortunate incident involving a malfunctioning gravity plate, and was now in medical bay with a fractured support limb. He would be unable to conduct his scheduled demonstration class. Would I be willing to cover? After all, I had combat experience, military background, perfectly qualified to lead a basic defensive tactics workshop. I should have said no. But my pride, my foolish, wounded pride after the hallway incident, made me say yes. Made me think that perhaps this would be an opportunity to restore some of my damaged reputation. Show the students that I was still a competent instructor, still worthy of respect. Hubris. The humans have a word for it. I understand why now. The combat training facility was located on the Academy's lower level, a wide open space with padded flooring and reinforced walls designed to handle the various sizes and strengths of our multi-species student body. When I arrived, 30 students were already present, wearing standard training gear and stretching in preparation for the session. Petra Chen was among them. Of course she was. She wore the Academy's standard combat training uniform, a flexible dark blue material that allowed for full range of movement. Her hair was tied back more severely than usual, and she was methodically going through what appeared to be a warm-up routine. Nothing dramatic, just basic stretches and joint rotations. Except every movement was precise, controlled, efficient. I watched her extend her leg in a stretch and realized with growing unease that the angle and height suggested a flexibility that could translate directly into striking capability. Watched her roll her shoulders and saw how the motion incorporated her entire core structure, weight distribution already optimized for rapid directional changes. She was not just stretching. She was preparing. "Good morning, cadets," I said, activating my translator to full volume. Instructor Javesh is temporarily unavailable, so I will be leading today's practical demonstration. We will be covering basic defensive holds and escape techniques. A few students exchanged glances. Krixik, the Volnari from my tactical theory class, raised an arm. "Instructor Velkara, will we be working in species-matched pairs? Given the strength differential concern." Standard question. Different species had vastly different physical capabilities, and combat training required careful pairing to avoid accidental injuries. "Yes," I confirmed. "I will be assigning partners based on comparable size and capability ratings. We want everyone to practice safely and effectively." I began calling out pairings, consulting the class roster on my datapad. Krixik with another Volnari. Reshvik with a similarly sized Tilnari. A Krexian paired with one of the heavier-set Doranian students. Standard protocols, everything by regulation. And then I reached the end of my list and realized I had an odd number of students. Petra Chen stood alone, no partner assigned. "Cadet Chen," I said, my voice betraying nothing of my internal panic. "It appears you will need to pair with me for this demonstration." She nodded. Just nodded. Completely casual, like this was perfectly normal. It was not normal. It was the opposite of normal. This was my nightmare made manifest. "Excellent," I continued, lying through my translator. "Let us begin with a simple wrist release technique. One partner will establish a grip. The other will execute the release. We will alternate roles. Remember, this is about technique, not strength. Control and precision are more important than force." The students spread out across the training floor, partnering up and beginning the exercise. I moved to an open space near the center, Petra following at a respectful distance. Professional. We were going to keep this professional. "I will demonstrate the grip first," I said, holding out my primary manipulator appendage. "Establish a firm hold on my wrist. Not enough to cause pain, but sufficient to restrict movement." Petra stepped forward and wrapped her hand around my wrist. Her grip was warm, her skin surprisingly soft, considering humans came from a death world. But the strength in those fingers, even restrained, was immediately apparent. "Good," I said. "Now, class, observe the release technique. You rotate your arm inward, toward the thumb, which is the weakest part of any grip structure. Apply downward pressure while stepping back to create distance." I demonstrated the movement. Petra released immediately, stepping back exactly the appropriate distance. "Now we reverse roles," I said. "I will grip, you will release." This was fine. This was a standard training exercise. Nothing could possibly go wrong. I established a grip on her wrist, careful to moderate my strength. The Sistine people are not weak, and I did not want to accidentally hurt her. Human durability notwithstanding, Petra executed the release. Smoothly, efficiently, with textbook perfect form. Her arm rotated, her body weight shifted, and suddenly my grip was broken and she was standing outside my reach with her hands raised in a neutral ready position. "Excellent technique, Cadet Chen," I said. My voice only shook a little. "Thank you, Instructor." She smiled. That same friendly, non-threatening smile. Why did I not believe it? "Next technique," I announced to the class. "Front headlock escape. One partner establishes a controlling position around the neck and shoulder. The defender must create space and extract themselves without using excessive force." This was more complex. Required closer contact. I was beginning to regret volunteering for this. "I will demonstrate the controlling position first," I said. Cadet Chen, if you would. Petra stepped closer. Too close. Humans had a much smaller personal space requirement than Sistine, I reminded myself. This was normal for her species. I carefully positioned my arms in a standard headlock configuration, one appendage around her neck, the other controlling her nearest arm. Textbook position. Nothing aggressive. Purely for instruction. The defender's goal is to protect their airway while creating separation, I explained to the watching students. You drop your weight, establish a stable base, and then work to remove the controlling limb from your neck. Cadet Chen, please demonstrate. What happened next occurred in perhaps 3 seconds, but my brain processed it in slow motion. Petra's weight dropped. Exactly as I had described. Her left hand came up to control my choking arm, maintaining her airway. Her right hand gripped my elbow. She pivoted, her entire body rotating with mechanical precision, and suddenly I was off balance. My weight forward, my center of gravity completely compromised. Then she just stopped. Froze in place with me bent forward, entirely at her mercy, perfectly positioned for any number of follow-up techniques that would have ended this demonstration very badly for me. Like this, Instructor? She asked, her voice perfectly calm. The training facility had gone completely silent. 30 students stared at us with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. Yes, I managed. Exactly like that. Excellent control, Cadet Chen. You may release. She did, smoothly and without any of the gloating that I absolutely would have expected from someone who had just casually demonstrated superior technique against their instructor. I straightened, trying to salvage what remained of my dignity. As you can see, proper technique overcomes size differential. Cadet Chen executed that escape perfectly, maintaining control throughout. Petra had already stepped back to a neutral position, hands relaxed, posture open and non-threatening. But I had felt that pivot, felt how easily she had manipulated my balance and position, had felt how much restraint she had used, how many options she had deliberately not taken. Next technique, I said, sounding far more confident than I felt. Rear bear hug escape. This is commonly used when an opponent attempts to restrict your arms and movement from behind. Cadet Chen, would you establish the controlling position this time? What was I thinking? Why did I suggest that? Petra moved behind me without hesitation. Her arms wrapped around my torso, pinning my secondary appendages against my sides. The grip was firm, but not painful, perfectly calibrated for demonstration purposes. And that was when I realized just how much trouble I was in. Because with her this close, I could feel her breathing. Slow, steady, completely relaxed. Her heart rate, transmitted through the contact points where her chest pressed against my back, was utterly calm. No elevation, no stress response, no indication that she was exerting any effort whatsoever. She was holding me, an opponent with significant size and strength advantages, and she was bored. The standard escape, I said, my voice coming out slightly strangled, involves dropping your weight, creating space with your hips, and targeting the attacker's weakest structural points. However, if the grip is too strong, alternative methods include striking backward with your head, or stamping on the attacker's feet. I demonstrated, moving through the escape in slow motion. Petra maintained just enough resistance to make it realistic, but released the moment. I completed the technique. Professional. She was being completely professional. Your turn, I said. Establish the hold and I will demonstrate the defense from the controller's perspective. Petra turned around, presenting her back. I moved into position, wrapping my arms around her in the same configuration she had used on me, and immediately realized my mistake. Because the moment I established the grip, I felt her entire body tense. Not with fear or panic, but with coiled potential energy. Like grabbing onto a compressed spring. Every muscle in her compact frame was suddenly engaged, ready to explode into action. She went through the escape technique slowly, for demonstration purposes. Weight drop, hip movement, hand position to break my grip. Each motion was controlled, measured, educational, but I could feel the power behind it, could feel how easily she could have accelerated those movements, how much force she was deliberately withholding. She was moving at perhaps 20% capacity, I estimated. Maybe less. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This human, this small, smiling human who probably massed 60 kilograms soaking wet, was strong enough and skilled enough to seriously injure me if she chose to. And she was choosing not to. Was actively, consciously, constantly choosing not to hurt anyone around her. Every moment of every day. She completed the escape and stepped away, turning back to face me with that same friendly expression. Was that correct, instructor? She asked. Perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. The rest of the class continued in similar fashion. Each technique I demonstrated, Petra executed flawlessly. Each hold I established, she escaped with casual competence. And through it all she maintained that same calm, controlled demeanor. The other students watched with varying degrees of fascination and horror as their intimidating instructor got systematically outmaneuvered by a human half his size who smiled the entire time. By the time the session ended, my pride was not just wounded, it was dead, completely deceased, buried 6 feet under, and marked with a headstone reading, "Here lies Valkara's dignity." As the students filed out, chattering excitedly about what they had witnessed, Petra approached me one final time. "Thank you for the demonstration, instructor," she said. "That was really educational." "You are very skilled, Cadet Chen," I replied, because acknowledging reality seemed like the only option left. "Your control is exceptional." She shrugged. "My dad was a martial arts instructor back on Earth. I have been training since I was 6. You pick up a few things over 16 years. 16 years, she had been practicing combat techniques for 16 years. Since she was a child. Of course she had. "Well," I said weakly, "thank you for your patience with the demonstration." Petra smiled again. The genuine friendly smile that no longer frightened me quite as much. "Anytime, instructor. See you in class." She left, and I stood alone in the training facility surrounded by padded mats and reinforced walls, wondering how exactly my carefully constructed professional identity had been so thoroughly dismantled in the span of 1 week. The answer, I was beginning to understand, was simple. I had bumped into a human and then made the mistake of treating her like she was the problem. Turned out I was the problem all along. Wait, hold on. I already told you about Petra approaching me after the hallway incident, didn't I? How she came to my office, apologized for her reaction, explained about the bad news from home. Yes, I did. But here is the thing I did not tell you. The thing I left out because I was still processing it, still trying to understand what it meant. That conversation did not end with her apology. After she explained about the news from home, about how she had just learned her grandmother was ill and might not have much time left, about how she had been walking through the halls trying not to cry when I collided with her and then yelled. After all of that, I just sat there like an idiot. Because what do you say to that? How do you respond when you realize that the terrifying predator stare that had haunted your nightmares was actually just grief, poorly masked, and instantly visible on a human's extremely expressive face? "I am sorry," I said again, but this time I meant it differently. I did not realize. I should not have yelled at you. The collision was my fault entirely. Petra shook her head. We both should have been paying more attention, and I should not have just stared at you like that. My mom always says my face shows everything I am feeling, and apparently when I am upset, I look angry instead of sad. Scared a lot of people back home with that. Your face is very expressive, I agreed carefully. Your species in general communicates a great deal through facial expressions. Yeah, we do. She smiled slightly. Must be weird for species that do not use faces the same way. I keep forgetting that not everyone reads emotions like we do. It is not weird, I said. Just different, and I am beginning to realize that I have been interpreting those differences through a lens of fear rather than curiosity. That made her pause. Fear? Of me? Might as well admit it. My dignity was already gone anyway. Yes, I said. Of you. Of humans in general, if I am being honest. Your species is from a death world. You are pursuit predators with forward-facing eyes and remarkable physical capabilities. Every instinct in my evolutionary history tells me to be cautious around apex predators. Petra considered this for a moment. I never really thought about it from that perspective. I mean, yeah, Earth is pretty hostile compared to most worlds. And yeah, humans are predators, technically. But we are also cooperative, social, generally friendly once you get to know us. Friendly predators, I said. That is the Volnari term for your species. She laughed. Actually laughed, the sound bright and genuine. That is perfect. I love that. Friendly predators. We should put that on t-shirts. And just like that, the tension broke. We talked for another 20 minutes. About Earth. About the specific conditions that had shaped human evolution. She described her home with obvious affection, talked about oceans and mountains, and weather patterns that could kill you if you were not careful, described animals that made the training facility's combat simulations look gentle. We had to adapt, she explained. Had to become smart, cooperative, and tough enough to survive everything the planet threw at us. But that same environment taught us to value each other, to work together, to protect the people we care about. I listened, really listened, and began to understand something important. Humans were dangerous, yes, but they were dangerous in defense of things they loved. Their aggression was not random or mindless. It was purposeful, controlled, and almost always directed at protecting rather than harming. I misjudged you, I said finally. Not just in the hallway but in my entire approach to teaching human students. I have been treating your capabilities as threats rather than recognizing them as strengths that come with responsibility. Petra nodded slowly. We are strong, we are tough. We can be scary when we need to be. But that does not mean we want to be. Most humans spend their entire lives trying not to hurt people. Trying to be gentle despite what we are capable of. That restraint, I said. That constant choice not to use your full capabilities. I saw it during the combat demonstration. You were holding back the entire time. Of course I was. You are my instructor. We were teaching a class. Why would I not hold back? She looked genuinely puzzled by the question. And that right there was the difference. For Petra, for humans in general, restraint was not a special effort. It was the default, the baseline. They walked through the galaxy surrounded by beings they could easily harm, and their first instinct was always to be careful, to be gentle, to modulate their strength and presence to avoid causing damage. I owe you another apology, I said. A better one. Not for the hallway incident, but for everything since. For being frightened of you instead of trying to understand you. For letting my evolutionary baggage interfere with my ability to teach effectively. Petra waved a hand dismissively. You are not the first instructor to be nervous around humans, and you will not be the last. We are getting used to it. Give it a few generations, and everyone will be comfortable with us. We are good at fitting in eventually. Still, I insisted. I am sorry. You deserve better. From me, and from this academy. She studied me for a moment, those forward-facing predator eyes meeting mine without aggression, without threat, just honest assessment. Apology accepted. Instructor, she said finally. And for what it is worth, you are a good teacher. Tough, but fair. That lecture about environmental adaptation was genuinely useful. I learned things. High praise from a human who had been playing tactical combat games since childhood. Thank you, Cadet Chen, I said. That means more than you know. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. My grandmother would have liked you, I think. She always said the best apologies are the ones where you understand what you actually did wrong, not just that you hurt someone's feelings. Is she going to be all right? I asked. Your grandmother? Petra's expression softened. No, but she has lived a long, good life. We all know it is coming. Doesn't make it easier, but at least we get to say goodbye. She left, and I sat there in my office, thinking about humans and their strange mixture of strength and vulnerability. About how they could be terrifying and gentle in the same breath. About how Petra Chen had just taught me more about effective communication in 30 minutes than I had learned in 12 cycles of teaching. The galaxy, I decided, was going to be very interesting with humans in it. 1 week later, I stood in front of my advanced tactical theory class with a completely revised lesson plan and a significantly altered perspective on what it meant to teach a multi-species academy. The topic was adaptive strategy. Specifically how different species approached problem-solving based on their evolutionary backgrounds. Standard curriculum, but I had made some significant changes to my usual presentation. Let us talk about adaptability, I began, pulling up a new set of images on the display screen. Not the theoretical kind we discuss in textbooks, but the practical kind that determines survival in unpredictable environments. The students settled into their seats. Data pads ready. Petra sat in her usual spot. 4th row, slightly left of center. She caught my eye and nodded slightly. Just a small acknowledgement. Professional and appropriate. I nodded back. Consider the human approach to hostile environments. I continued, highlighting a series of images from Earth. Deserts, jungles, Arctic regions, volcanic zones. Their homeworld presents extreme diversity in climate, terrain, and threat profiles. Rather than specializing for one environment, humans developed broad-spectrum adaptability. Krixik raised an arm. Instructor, you have mentioned human capabilities before, usually in the context of physical prowess. Are you suggesting their adaptability is more significant than their strength? Good question. Exactly the kind of critical thinking I wanted to encourage. Yes, I said simply. Cadet Chen, would you care to elaborate on how humans approach unfamiliar environments? Petra did not hesitate. We observe, experiment, and iterate. If we do not know how something works, we test it carefully. If a strategy fails, we try something different. Our advantage is not that we are stronger or faster than other species. It is that we are flexible enough to find multiple solutions to the same problem. Precisely, I said. And this flexibility extends beyond environmental adaptation. It includes social adaptation, technological innovation, and strategic thinking. Humans are successful not because they dominate through force, but because they learn quickly and adjust their approach based on new information. I pulled up a comparison chart showing different species problem-solving methodologies. The Sistine approach was cautious and analytical. The Vulnari method favored collective decision-making. The Crexian style emphasized individual expertise. And the human approach? It incorporated elements of all of them, switching between strategies as circumstances required. This is why humans excel in coalition operations, I continued. They can adapt their communication style, their tactical approach, even their command structure to work effectively with species that think very differently than they do. That flexibility is a force multiplier. Reshvik, the Telnari student, made a thoughtful humming sound. So, when we study human tactics, we should focus less on their physical capabilities and more on their adaptive frameworks. Exactly. Physical capability without adaptability is limited. A strong fighter who cannot adjust to changing circumstances will lose to a weaker opponent with better strategic flexibility. I glanced at Petra, who was trying very hard not to smile. She knew I was describing our combat demonstration from last week without explicitly mentioning it. The rest of the class progressed smoothly. Students asked questions, offered insights, engaged with the material in ways that suggested they were actually thinking rather than just memorizing. Several of them asked Petra for her perspective on various scenarios, treating her as a subject matter expert rather than a curiosity or a threat. The shift in classroom dynamic was obvious and healthy. When the session ended and students began filing out, Petra approached my podium one last time. "That was a good lecture, instructor," she said. "Really good. Fair and accurate." "I had a good teacher," I replied. "Someone who showed me that my assumptions were interfering with my effectiveness." She laughed. "I just existed in your general vicinity and let you draw your own conclusions." Yes, well, sometimes that is the best teaching method. Allowing people to recognize their own mistakes rather than pointing them out directly. Petra shouldered her bag, preparing to leave for her next class. "For what it is worth, Vilkara, you are one of the best instructors here. Tough, demanding, but you actually care about whether we learn. That matters more than you probably realize." The use of my name without rank or title caught me off guard. It was familiar without being disrespectful. A gesture of genuine respect between equals rather than the formal distance between instructor and student. "Thank you, Petra," I said, returning the familiarity. "That means a great deal coming from you." She nodded and left, joining the flow of students heading toward their next obligations. I stood there for a moment, alone in the empty classroom, reflecting on how much had changed in 1 week. How a single collision in a crowded hallway, one moment of fear and misunderstanding, had forced me to confront assumptions I did not even know I was making. Humans were dangerous, yes. But so were most species when threatened or cornered. What made humans different was not their capacity for violence, but their conscious choice to restrain it. Their ability to be gentle despite their strength, their willingness to adapt to others rather than demanding others adapt to them. I had spent 12 cycles teaching tactical theory, combat strategy, and survival techniques to cadets from dozens of species. But it took one human with an expressive face and exceptional patience to teach me the most important lesson of all. Fear is a terrible foundation for understanding. Respect, earned through honest interaction and genuine curiosity, is so much better. I gathered my materials, deactivated the display screen, and headed toward my office. Tomorrow I would be revising more lesson plans, incorporating these new insights into my teaching methodology. There were other human students in other classes, and they all deserved better than to be treated as threats rather than people. The galaxy was changing. Humans were here now, bringing their death world resilience, their adaptive flexibility, and their friendly predator nature to the larger community. We could either fear them or learn from them. I knew which choice I was making. And it all started because I bumped into Petra Chen in a hallway, and she gave me a look that scared me badly enough to apologize. Best apology I ever made. Turned out I meant it the second time even more than the first.